Welcome back to my channel, The Flute Nerd. Today we are going to talk again about scales, everyone's favorite topic. Scales and arpeggios are fundamental to everyone's flute practice, so please excuse me for banging on about them a bit. I doubt many people would argue if I said you had to practice your scales if you wanted to be a professional musician. But what about for those who just want to play the flute for fun? Why do we even need to bother with our scales if we're just noodling around on the flute for fun? Careful, questions like that have been known to give music teachers heart attacks. But it's a fair question. So let's take a deeper look into why we should practice our scales, even if we're playing for fun. Scales, arpeggios, and scale patterns are essentially cheat sheets. They are the building blocks of all the music that you want to play just for fun. The more you practice and understand your scales, the easier playing feels. And the easier playing feels, the more likely you're gonna end up having fun doing it. So here are 6 reasons why practicing your scales is a valuable tool for any flute player, even the casual ones. Number 1. All music is made up of scales and scale patterns. Literally all music. While there is of course some 20th century experimental music on the fringes that would like to challenge that statement, it's generally true. Even if you're playing non-Western music, most of the music is based on some kind of modal or scale system like Indian ragas or Middle Eastern maqam. This means that scales are the foundation of anything you want to play. And just like the foundation of a house, if that foundation isn't placed properly and solidly, the entire structure is in danger of falling apart. Solid technique built through regular practice is going to keep that foundation nice and strong. Reason number 2 is understanding your scales helps with your pattern recognition. Think about it this way. Without learning your scales and scale patterns, every time you approach a new piece, you're having to learn every individual note. That's a lot of notes. But if you practice and understand your scales, all of a sudden it's kind of like seeing through the matrix. The music suddenly makes way more sense. Because essentially, music is just an ordered collection of scales and scale patterns. Understanding our scales demystifies the music. All of a sudden, that really crazy run that you've been trying to learn is not just a whole bunch of random notes. It's just a major scale. Or another tricky bit you might have been struggling with, turns out it's just a series of broken arpeggios. So essentially practicing your scales is providing your brain with this wealth of musical vocabulary. It gives your brain the tools to navigate a tune automatically. How cool is that? Reason number 3, practicing your scales builds muscle memory. What exactly is muscle memory? It's when your body remembers how to do something without having to think about it. Muscle memory is what allows you to type really fast on your computer. Or for the younger contingent out there, it's what allows your thumbs to go really fast when you're texting your friends. When you're typing or texting, you don't have to think of every individual letter. You just kind of let your fingers do their thing. Muscle memory is a skill that your body learns over time through repetition. With that repetition, the movement gets hardwired into our muscles so that they know how to do it without us having to focus our attention on that movement. It's kind of like having a separate brain for your muscles, from how we hold the flute to the position of our embouchure and, of course, our fingers. Practicing our scales is essentially the repetition that will build that muscle memory into our fingers. And remember, if all music is just a collection of scales and scale patterns, this unlocks the ability to play so much of the music you enjoy playing on autopilot. That's a pretty good deal. Reason number 4 is practicing your scales is essentially aural training. While we're busy trying to train our fingers what to do, we're also training our ears. The more we practice our scales and chords, or in the case of flute, arpeggios, the more we'll get used to how they sound. This means the more we practice our scales, the more we'll be able to recognize different types of scales between our majors, our harmonic minors, natural minors, chromatic scales, etc. And we'll also start recognizing their key patterns like ascending or descending scales and arpeggios. Scales also help us understand the relationship between different intervals. A semitone becomes identifiable as a leading tone in the scale, and major and minor thirds become much easier to spot the more familiar you are with your major and minor scales. We may not all have perfect pitch, as nice as that would be, but practicing our scales allows us to develop our relative pitch. Reason number 5, scales make memorizing so much easier. Again, practicing your scales is a little bit like seeing through the matrix. Now when you look at a sheet of music, instead of just seeing a random collection of notes, you start to identify lots of different kinds of scale patterns. Should we decide to memorize the music that we're playing, instead of having to memorize every individual notes, we just have to recognize the patterns and remember the patterns. So for example, take this excerpt from Ian Clarke's Hypnosis. There are a lot of notes in this 32-note run, which is broken into 10, 10, and 12. Memorizing the order of each one of those notes could take you forever. But if you've practiced your scales and arpeggios, you would easily recognize this as a 2-octave E minor 7th chord. Boom! Memorized. And reason number 6 is that scales offer an easy way to mark our progress. Let's be honest, this is one of the best reasons to practice your scales. Slowly adding to the list of scales that we know and understand is an easy way for us to see how far we've come. It's also worth marking down how comfortable you feel with those scales, at what tempo you can play those scales, because those are other ways of marking our progress. This is also a prime example of why keeping a practice notebook is very handy. Every time you've practiced, mark down what scales you practiced, at what tempo, and how comfortable you felt with them. Then as you look back through previous notes, you can start to see how quickly you've progressed. So I hope this video has helped convince you exactly why we need to practice our scales. But that doesn't really stop them from being boring, does it? But they don't have to feel like work. Be sure to check out my other video on how to gamify your scales for a little bit of extra fun. By adding elements of games to your scale practice, you can actually start to enjoy them. And the more we enjoy them, the more we'll practice them. And hopefully by now you know why that's so important. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to get notifications about the latest videos. In the meantime, happy practicing!